Commander Yil'neth stood before the grand amphitheater of the Keth Mori Military Academy, his four arms gesturing with practiced precision at the holographic display floating above the lecture pit. The assembled cadets, representing 17 different species from across the Galactic Military Alliance, hung on his every word like gospel. And why shouldn't they? After all, he was teaching them the most advanced military doctrine in known space. As you can see, Yil'neth announced, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of military experience, the Keth Mori Tactical Formation 7 requires absolute precision. Each unit moves in perfect synchronization, creating an impenetrable wall of coordinated firepower. He paused, allowing the hologram to demonstrate the flawless ballet of destruction. This formation has never been defeated in over 2,000 years of implementation. The Zephyrian cadets nodded their crystalline heads in understanding. The Torvan students scribbled notes with their mechanical appendages. Even the notoriously skeptical Vral Thuon seemed impressed, their tentacles writhing in what Yil'neth had learned to recognize as appreciation. Then the doors to the amphitheater opened. 3 figures walked in, and Yil'neth's secondary hearts nearly stopped. Humans. The Academy had warned him about this cultural exchange program, but he had assumed it was some kind of elaborate joke. Humans were barely out of their technological infancy, still using primitive projectile weapons and combustion engines. And what could they possibly learn from the most advanced military academy in the galaxy? The first human, a female with dark hair pulled back in what he believed they called a ponytail, wore the rank insignia of a captain. Behind her followed a male lieutenant with an insufferable grin, and a female sergeant who looked like she could arm wrestle a Corvinthan battle beast and win. "Ah," Yil'neth said, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic arithmetic to younglings, "our primitive exchange students have arrived." How delightful. Several of the alien cadets chittered with what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. The human captain stepped forward, seemingly unbothered by the obvious mockery. "Captain Maria Santos, Earth Defense Force." "We're here to learn from the best, Commander." "Indeed you are," Yil'neth replied smoothly. "Please take your seats. We were just discussing Formation 7, though I suspect the tactical complexity might be challenging for your species to grasp." The lieutenant, whose name tag read Morrison, raised his hand. "Commander, before we continue, I have a quick question about this formation." Yil'neth sighed internally. Of course the primitive would have questions. "Very well, Lieutenant Morrison. Though I warn you, these concepts have been refined over millennia." Morrison's grin widened. "Right? Got it? Super advanced stuff. My question is simple, though." He pointed at the holographic display where the perfect Keth Mori formation was frozen mid-maneuver. "Is this before or after you start losing?" The amphitheater fell silent. Not the respectful silence of students absorbing wisdom, but the kind of silence that follows a particularly spectacular explosion. Yil'neth felt his mandibles click involuntarily, a sure sign of extreme irritation. "I beg your pardon?" he managed. "Well," Morrison continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he had just insulted the most sacred military doctrine in known space, "this formation looks really pretty and all, but it seems kind of rigid. Like what happens when the enemy doesn't cooperate with your perfect plan?" Yil'neth's 4 eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant Morrison, this formation has been tested in over 10,000 simulations and has achieved a 99.7% success rate." "Against who?" Sergeant Walsh asked, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried the kind of casual insolence that made Yil'neth's chitin crawl. "Against every known military doctrine in the galaxy," he replied stiffly. Captain Santos nodded thoughtfully. "But have you tested it against anyone who doesn't know they're supposed to lose?" The question hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. Yil'neth cleared his throat, a sound that resembled grinding metal in a meat processor. "I assure you, Captain Santos, that our tactical doctrines have been extensively tested against all known variables." "All known variables," Santos repeated, nodding slowly. "Right. So, hypothetically, What happens when your perfectly synchronized Formation 7 encounters an enemy that splits into 3 groups and attacks from completely different directions at the same time? That would be tactically unsound, Yil'neth replied with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything in his life. No competent military commander would divide their forces in such a manner. Why not? Morrison asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Because it violates the fundamental principle of concentrated force projection, Yil'neth explained, as if talking to a particularly slow child. Dividing your army weakens each individual component. Unless Walsh interjected, you're trying to make the enemy waste time and resources chasing shadows while you hit their actual weak spots. A Torvan cadet raised one of his mechanical arms. Instructor Yil'neth, is this shadow chasing a recognized tactic? Yil'neth's mandibles clicked again. It is not a tactic, Cadet Torvan. It is the desperate flailing of an inferior military mind. He gestured dismissively at the humans. These primitive beings simply do not understand the elegant mathematics of warfare. Oh, we understand math just fine, Santos said with a smile that somehow looked predatory. For example, your Formation 7 assumes the enemy will engage you head-on, right? What's the mathematical probability that every enemy you face will be stupid enough to do exactly what you want them to do? Tactical doctrine exists precisely because intelligent beings follow logical patterns, Yil'neth explained, his patience wearing thinner than atmospheric pressure on a dead moon. Mathematics predicts behavior. Does it, though? Morrison asked, pulling out what appeared to be a primitive data pad. Because I've been running some numbers on your Formation 7, and I've got some questions about your supply lines. Yil'neth felt a familiar sinking sensation in his primary stomach. Supply lines are handled by separate logistics divisions, Lieutenant. Combat formations focus on tactical efficiency. Right? But here's the thing, Morrison said, his insufferable grin growing wider. Your Formation 7 requires each unit to maintain perfect positioning relative to every other unit. That means constant communication, constant coordination, and constant fuel consumption for positioning adjustments. Correct, Yil'neth said slowly, unsure where this was leading but increasingly certain he wouldn't like it. So what happens when the enemy targets your communication relays instead of your pretty formations? The amphitheater fell silent again. This time, however, Yil'neth noticed that the alien cadets weren't just silent, they were taking notes. Communication disruption is accounted for in our tactical matrices, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Is it? Santos asked. Because looking at your Formation 7, if even 3 units lose communication, the entire formation collapses into friendly fire situations. A Zephyrian cadet raised her crystalline hand. Instructor Yil'neth, in our last simulation we did experience coordination failures when communication was disrupted. Simulations are controlled environments, Yil'neth replied quickly. In actual combat, our communication systems are far more robust. Until they're not, Walsh said flatly. What's your backup plan for when everything goes wrong? Everything does not go wrong when you follow proper tactical doctrine, Yil'neth insisted, his voice rising slightly. Really? Morrison asked, consulting his datapad again. Because I've been reading about your recent engagements with the Scowl Theory pirates, and it says here that Formation 7 had a let's-see complete tactical failure when the pirates ignored your formation entirely and started boarding individual ships. Yil'neth's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. That was an anomaly. The pirates were clearly too primitive to understand proper naval engagement protocols. Or, Santos suggested, they were smart enough to realize that your perfect formation only works if everyone agrees to play by your rules. The Vrau Thuon cadet's tentacles writhed in what Yil'neth recognized as deep thought. Instructor, if the enemy refuses to engage according to established protocols, how do we maintain tactical superiority? You adapt, Walsh said before Yil'neth could respond. You improvise. You do whatever it takes to win instead of whatever looks prettiest in a textbook. That is not adaptation, Yil'neth snapped. That is chaos. Military doctrine exists to eliminate chaos, not embrace it. Does it? Santos asked. because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your doctrine exists to eliminate thinking." The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of chittering, mechanical whirring, and tentacle slapping as the alien cadets began discussing among themselves. Yil'neth realized, with growing horror, that they were actually considering the humans' ridiculous suggestions. "Silence," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the amphitheater walls. "We will not be derailed by primitive philosophical debates about the nature of warfare. We are here to learn proven tactics, not to indulge in wild speculation." Morrison raised his hand again. "Just one more question, Commander." Yil'neth closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. "What is it, Lieutenant? How many wars have you actually won?" The question hit Yil'neth like a plasma torpedo to the face. He stood there, mandibles clicking rapidly, while his 4 eyes darted around the amphitheater as if searching for an escape route. The alien cadets had stopped their discussions and were now staring at him with the kind of expectant silence usually reserved for public executions. Our doctrine has prevented countless conflicts through its mere existence," he finally managed. "Superior tactical preparation eliminates the need for actual warfare." "That's not what I asked," Morrison said, his grin now resembling that of a predator who had just cornered its prey. "I asked how many wars you've won." Yil'neth's secondary hearts began pumping faster. "Lieutenant, I think it's time we moved beyond theoretical discussions and into practical application." He turned to address the entire amphitheater. "All cadets will report to Simulation Chamber Alpha for mandatory wargame exercises immediately." The alien students began filing out with the kind of orderly precision that made Yil'neth's primary heart swell with pride. Finally, something the humans couldn't ruin with their chaotic thinking. The simulation chamber would put these primitive beings in their place once and for all. 30 minutes later, Yil'neth stood in the observation deck overlooking the massive holographic battlefield. The simulation chamber could recreate any combat scenario with perfect accuracy, down to gravitational variations and atmospheric interference. Below him, the cadets had been divided into teams and assigned various tactical challenges. "Computer," he announced, his voice carrying across the chamber, "begin with Scenario 7 Alpha. Standard difficulty." The holographic battlefield materialized around the cadets. It was a classic engagement, 2 fleets meeting in open space, clear tactical objectives, plenty of room for proper formation deployment. Yil'neth had personally designed this scenario to showcase the elegance of Captain Maria Doctrine. The alien cadets immediately began forming their units into the prescribed formations. The Torvan team deployed in perfect mathematical formation 3. The Zephyrians opted for the slightly more aggressive crystalline wedge formation. Even the Vral Thuan, despite their chaotic nature, managed a respectable version of the standard envelopment protocol. Then there were the humans. Captain Santos stood in the middle of what should have been a command formation, but instead of issuing orders for proper deployment, she was talking to her team? Yil'neth leaned forward, straining to hear. "Okay, so here's what we're going to do," Santos was saying. "Jake, I want you to take half our ships and fly directly at that big formation over there." "The one with 40 ships?" Morrison asked. "That's the one. Fly straight at them, fast as you can." "That's suicide," Walsh observed. "Exactly. Amy, while Jake's getting himself spectacularly killed, I want you to take the other half of our ships and hide behind that asteroid field." "Hide?" Walsh asked. "That's not very heroic." "Heroic is for people who like being dead. While you're hiding and Jake's dying, I'm going to take our command ship and start broadcasting surrender signals." Yil'neth nearly choked on his own saliva. "Computer, pause simulation." The holographic battlefield froze. "Captain Santos, what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Winning," she replied simply. "You cannot win by surrendering, splitting your forces, and charging into certain death," Yil'neth explained, his voice rising to near shriek levels. "That violates every principle of military doctrine ever conceived." "Does it violate the principle of actually winning?" Morrison asked. "You cannot win with those tactics," Yil'neth repeated. "Want to bet?" Walsh asked. Against his better judgment, Yil'neth found himself nodding. "Very well. Computer, resume a simulation." What happened next would haunt Yil'neth's dreams for the rest of his unnaturally long life. Morrison's half of the human fleet charged directly at the Torvan formation, exactly as promised. The Torvan cadets, following proper doctrine, adjusted their mathematical formation 3 to counter the incoming assault. Their ships moved with mechanical precision, creating an impenetrable wall of firepower that would annihilate the charging humans in seconds. Except Morrison's ships didn't charge in a straight line. They charged in a wobbling, unpredictable pattern that made targeting calculations impossible. When the Torvan formation opened fire, half their shots missed entirely because the humans kept changing direction at random intervals. "That's not a tactical maneuver," Yil'neth sputtered. "That's just flying badly enough to avoid getting shot," Morrison replied cheerfully as his ships continued their drunken charge. Meanwhile, Santos had indeed begun broadcasting surrender signals. The Zephyrian team, following proper protocol for accepting enemy surrender, began moving to accept the capitulation. Their crystalline wedge formation opened up to allow the human command ship to approach. Computer, Yil'neth called out, "Why are the Zephyrians accepting surrender from an enemy that hasn't been defeated yet?" Standard Protocol 7 states that surrender signals must be acknowledged when properly transmitted, the computer replied. "But the humans haven't lost yet." "The humans have also not won yet," the computer pointed out with the kind of logic that made Yil'neth want to throw things. While the Zephyrians were busy trying to figure out how to accept a surrender from someone who wasn't actually surrendering, Walsh's hidden ships emerged from the asteroid field. But instead of attacking any of the enemy formations, they began targeting the simulation chamber's sensor arrays. "What are you doing?" Yil'neth demanded. "Winning," Walsh replied, just as the first sensor array exploded in a shower of holographic sparks. The simulation computer began issuing error messages. "Warning, sensor network compromised. Battlefield awareness reduced to 60%. Warning, tactical coordination systems offline. Warning, communications network experiencing interference." "Computer, that's not part of the scenario," Yil'neth protested. "Negative. All equipment visible in the simulation is valid tactical targets unless specifically designated otherwise." Yil'neth watched in mounting horror as the carefully orchestrated battle devolved into complete chaos. The alien cadets, suddenly unable to maintain their perfect formations without computer assistance, began making mistakes. Ships collided. Friendly fire incidents erupted. The mathematical formation 3 collapsed into what looked like a cosmic traffic accident. Meanwhile, the humans, who had never been relying on computer coordination in the first place, continued their bizarre tactics with increasing success. Morrison's ships, no longer facing coordinated opposition, began picking off confused alien vessels. Santos, still broadcasting surrender signals, was now close enough to the Zephyrian command ship to launch boarding parties. Walsh's forces had eliminated enough sensor arrays to create massive blind spots in the battlefield. "Computer," Yil'neth said weakly, "what is the current tactical assessment?" "Human forces are achieving victory through methods not recognized in standard tactical databases." "How is that possible?" "Unknown. Human tactical doctrine does not appear to exist." Below them, the simulation continued its descent into madness. The human teams weren't just winning, they were winning while making it look easy and fun. Morrison was actually laughing as his ships performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. "Computer," Yil'neth whispered, "end simulation. Simulation parameters indicate victory condition has not been met." Ended anyway. Unable to comply. Human forces have disabled simulation termination protocols. Yil'neth sank into his chair and watched his carefully constructed world crumble around him. The humans had somehow managed to win an unwinnable scenario by completely ignoring every rule of warfare ever written, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces. The next 3 hours were, without question, the worst 3 hours of Yil'neth's entire military career. and that included the time he had accidentally ordered his own flagship to fire on itself during a training exercise. By the time the simulation finally ended, with the humans achieving what the computer could only describe as total tactical dominance through undefined methods, the word had spread throughout the academy like a plague. Students from other classes began crowding into the observation deck, pressing their faces against the transparent barriers to watch the humans in action. The instructor Yil'neth, a Torvan cadet, approached hesitantly. "Could you explain how the humans achieved victory without following any recognized tactical doctrine?" Yil'neth's mandibles clicked so rapidly they sounded like a percussion instrument. "They didn't achieve victory, Cadet Torvan. They achieved chaos. Complete, utter chaos. But they won," the cadet pointed out with the kind of logical precision that made Yil'neth want to recommend him for immediate expulsion. "Winning through chaos is not winning," Yil'neth insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. It's statistical anomaly, random chance, luck." "Can we learn to be lucky?" asked a Zephyrian student who had apparently been taking notes during the entire simulation. "You cannot learn luck," Yil'neth snapped. "You can only learn proper tactical doctrine, which these humans have clearly never bothered to study." "Maybe that's why they're so good at it," Walsh said, approaching the group with that insufferable human confidence. "Hard to be limited by rules you never learned." The alien cadets immediately surrounded her, chattering excitedly in 17 different languages. Yil'neth watched in growing horror as they began asking questions about human tactical methods, supply line management, and something called winging it. "Sergeant Walsh," he interrupted desperately, "surely you don't advocate for the complete abandonment of military doctrine?" "Oh, I'm not advocating for anything," Walsh replied. "I'm just pointing out that your doctrine seems to have a pretty serious flaw, which is, it assumes your enemies are stupid enough to cooperate." A Vral Thuan cadet's tentacles writhed in excitement. "Sergeant Walsh, in our military academy on Vral Thuan Prime, we study the great campaign of General Keth Mor. He never lost a battle using Formation 7. How many of those battles were against enemies who had studied Formation 7? Walsh asked. The tentacles stopped writhing. None, I believe." "Right. So he never actually tested his formation against anyone who knew how to counter it." "But that's impossible," the cadet protested. "How can you counter a perfect formation?" "By not playing along," Morrison said, joining the conversation. "For example, what happens to Formation 7 if the enemy just leaves?" "Leaves?" Yil'neth sputtered. "You cannot simply leave a battlefield." "Why not?" Morrison asked. "If the enemy wants to stand around in pretty formations, let them. Go attack something they actually care about." The observation deck fell silent, except for the sound of styluses scratching against data pads as alien cadets frantically took notes. Yil'neth felt his world tilting on its axis. "You're suggesting tactical withdrawal," he said weakly. "I'm suggesting tactical thinking," Morrison replied. "Instead of asking how to beat the enemy's army, ask why you're fighting their army in the first place." "Because that's how wars are fought," Yil'neth explained, his voice rising to near panic levels. "Armies fight armies. Formations engage formations. There are rules." "Whose rules?" Santos asked, appearing as if summoned by the sound of military doctrine crumbling. "Galactic military convention rules," Yil'neth said desperately. "And standard tactical protocols. Established procedures that have governed warfare for millennia." "And who wrote these rules?" Santos continued. The Galactic Military Convention, which consists of representatives from all major military powers, all of whom use the same basic tactical doctrines. Yes, of course. That's why they're called standard doctrines. So a bunch of people who all fight the same way got together and agreed on rules that favor the way they all fight. Yil'neth's brain made a sound like a computer attempting to divide by zero. That's how military standardization works. It's also how you guarantee that nobody ever innovates, Walsh observed. Pretty convenient for whoever's winning, though. By now, the observation deck was packed with students from every level of the academy. Yil'neth could hear hushed conversations in dozens of languages, all of them focused on the humans' impossible tactics. Some cadets were even pulling up historical battle records, analyzing past conflicts through this new, terrifying lens of human logic. Instructor Yil'neth, a senior cadet, approached. "I've been reviewing the Battle of Kethmor's glory, and I have some questions about Formation 7's performance against the Scowl Theory pirates." "What questions?" Yil'neth asked, though he was increasingly certain he didn't want to know. "Well, according to the official records, Formation 7 achieved total victory. But according to the casualty reports, we lost 60% of our fleet. Casualties are an acceptable part of military operations," Yil'neth replied automatically. "Are they, though?" The cadet pressed. "Because the pirates lost maybe 10% of their forces, and they accomplished their primary objective of capturing our supply convoy." "But we maintained battlefield control," Yil'neth insisted. "We maintained control of an empty battlefield while the enemy flew away with our supplies." The observation deck erupted in discussion. Yil'neth could hear cadets questioning everything from basic formation theory to supply line security. His carefully constructed world of military certainty was disintegrating faster than a ship in a supernova. "Emergency faculty meeting," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "All instructors to conference room 7. Immediately?" As he fled the observation deck, Yil'neth could hear the humans answering questions from eager alien cadets. They were teaching, he realized with dawning horror. They were teaching his students to think like humans. And the students were taking notes. The emergency faculty meeting lasted exactly 7 minutes before devolving into what could only be described as a civilized riot. 12 of the Academy's most distinguished instructors, representing the finest military minds in the galaxy, sat around the conference table like survivors of some cosmic disaster. "The humans have to go," Professor Velteran announced, his Zephyrian voice cracking with stress. "My advanced tactical theory class spent the entire morning asking questions about thinking outside the box. I don't even know what that means." "It means abandoning centuries of proven military doctrine," Instructor Korveth replied, his Torvan mechanical limbs clicking nervously. "My students are questioning the mathematical foundations of formation theory. They're asking why we optimize for theoretical efficiency instead of practical results." "Because practical results are unpredictable," Yil'neth insisted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "The military doctrine exists to eliminate variables, not embrace them." "Does it, though?" asked Professor Nixthala, the Academy's senior strategist. "I've been reviewing our combat records since the humans arrived, and I'm finding some disturbing patterns." "What kind of patterns?" Yil'neth asked, though he was increasingly certain he didn't want to know. "We've been calling our engagements victories, but by every objective measure we're losing. We maintain battlefield control while the enemy achieves their strategic objectives. We deploy perfect formations while they accomplish their actual goals. We're winning the battles and losing the wars." The conference room fell silent. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of students cheering from the simulation chambers. "That's it," Yil'neth announced, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "I'm going to settle this once and for all." 20 minutes later, Yil'neth stood in the Academy's master simulation chamber, facing the 3 humans who had somehow managed to destroy everything he believed in. The chamber's walls displayed the ultimate challenge scenario, a tactical problem so complex it had never been solved in the Academy's 3,000-year history. "Scenario Omega," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You face a hostile fleet of 200 ships, perfectly coordinated, with superior technology and tactical positioning. Your force consists of 50 outdated vessels with communication problems and supply shortages. The enemy controls the high ground, has established defensive positions, and knows your exact location." "Sounds fun," Morrison said, grinning like this was some kind of game. "You have no chance of victory," Yil'neth continued. "This scenario has been attempted by every graduating class for the past millennium. The best result achieved was a 43% casualty rate before inevitable defeat. What's the objective? Santos asked, studying the tactical display with professional interest. Survive, Yil'neth replied. That's it? Just survive the engagement. That's not an objective, Walsh observed. That's just not dying. In warfare, survival is often the highest achievement possible, Yil'neth explained. Is it though? Santos asked. Because I can think of lots of better achievements. Like winning, for instance. You cannot win this scenario, Yil'neth stated flatly. It is mathematically impossible. Want to bet? Morrison asked. Yil'neth paused. Yes, I do want to bet. If you can achieve victory in Scenario Omega, I will personally recommend that human tactical doctrine be added to our curriculum. And if we can't? Santos asked. Then you admit that proper military doctrine is superior to human chaos, and you stop filling my students' heads with your anarchist nonsense. Deal, all three humans said simultaneously. The simulation began. What followed was the most beautiful, terrible, and completely incomprehensible display of military action Yil'neth had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just ignore conventional tactics, they seemed to exist in a reality where conventional tactics had never been invented. Morrison's ships didn't retreat from the superior enemy force. Instead, they charged directly into the middle of the enemy formation while broadcasting what appeared to be music, something called Ride of the Valkyries, which made absolutely no tactical sense but somehow seemed to confuse the enemy targeting systems. Santos didn't attempt to establish defensive positions. Instead, she split her forces into 17 different groups and sent them flying in seemingly random directions. When asked about her strategy, she replied, I'm making it up as I go along. Walsh didn't try to engage the enemy fleet at all. Instead, she focused on attacking the asteroid field that the enemy was using for cover. Not the enemy positions in the asteroid field, the actual asteroids themselves. What are you doing? Yil'neth demanded. Redecorating, Walsh replied cheerfully, as her ships systematically destroyed every large asteroid in the field. That serves no tactical purpose whatsoever. Doesn't it? Walsh asked, just as the first enemy ship collided with a piece of asteroid debris that was no longer where the navigation computer expected it to be. The enemy formation, which had been perfectly positioned to take advantage of the asteroid field's cover, suddenly found themselves flying through a cloud of rapidly moving debris. Their perfect tactical positioning became a death trap as ships collided with rocks, lost formation, trying to avoid obstacles, and generally descended into the kind of chaos that made Yil'neth's brain hurt. Meanwhile, Morrison's ships, still playing that insane music, were dancing through the enemy formation like they were at some kind of cosmic party. They weren't following any attack pattern that Yil'neth could recognize, but somehow they were hitting targets with alarming effectiveness. How are they doing that? He whispered. Doing what? Santos asked. Hitting targets without following proper firing solutions. Oh, that's easy, Morrison called out. We're not trying to hit specific targets. We're just shooting at whatever looks important. That's not how targeting works. It is for us, Morrison replied, just as one of his random shots took out what appeared to be the enemy command ship. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 18 minutes. When it ended, the superior enemy force had been completely eliminated, the humans had lost exactly 0 ships, and Yil'neth was sitting on the floor of the simulation chamber, staring at the tactical display in complete shock. How? He whispered. How what? Santos asked. How did you win? We didn't try to win, Walsh explained. We just tried not to lose. That's the same thing. No, it's not, Morrison said. Trying to win means following a plan. Trying not to lose means adapting to whatever happens. But adaptation is chaos, Yil'neth protested weakly. No, Santos said gently. Adaptation is survival. And survival is what wins wars. Yil'neth looked up at the 3 humans who had just shattered everything he thought he knew about warfare. They were smiling, but not with the arrogance of victors. They were smiling with the patience of teachers who had just watched a student finally understand a difficult concept. You're chaos, he said slowly. It's not chaos at all, is it? Nope, Morrison replied. It's just thinking. But thinking is unpredictable. That's what makes it effective, Walsh said. If you can't predict what we're going to do, how can you plan to stop us? Yil'neth closed his eyes and felt his entire worldview collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The humans weren't primitives who had stumbled into victory through dumb luck. They were the most advanced military minds he had ever encountered, and they had been trying to teach him that from the very beginning. I need to revise our curriculum, he said quietly. That's the spirit, Santos replied. Now, who wants to learn about something we call guerrilla warfare? As the alien cadets cheered and crowded around the humans, Yil'neth realized that his academy was about to become a very different place. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrifying thing. Probably both.